Greetings. My name is Rashawn Perry, and I am founder and queen bee of Cedar Grove Publishing. Cedar Grove publishes a wide variety of books in a diverse space in various genres. Today, I'm here to talk about horror. I'm also here to introduce author Elmarie Wood and the new book series she's doing with us entitled The Realm. The Realm is a wonderful book. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a publisher. I'm saying that because it's a good book. And you can pick it up as a print copy or as an ebook. The book is full of wonderful psychological thriller goodness, and you hopefully will enjoy it as much as I have. In fact, other people have enjoyed The Realm as well. Here's a little something from fellow author R.J. Joseph. She's the author of Monstrous Domesticities. I hope I said that word right. Please pick that up as well. Here's what she says. In The Realm, Elmarie Wood presents readers with a cast of nuanced characters against the backdrop of an intricate world where nothing is simply black and white or right or wrong. The quote-unquote sins of the father takes a refreshing detour from triteness and makes us accomplices to the main character, Patrick's, endeavors. So again, I am Rashawn Perry from Cedar Grove Books. Please pick up a copy for yourself and everyone else you know of The Realm, Book 1. Please stay on for an interview with author Elmarie Wood coming up in a few moments. And thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for joining me, John. I'm so excited we get to talk again. So let me tell you guys, John Robison and I met at Balticon. Was it last year or 2 years ago? I can't even remember.
2 years ago.
Okay, and we were on a panel together. He was the moderator, and it was either directly about Lovecraft, which I don't think is true. I think it was just controversial authors.
No, it was Lovecraft and it was basically Lovecraft and minority authors, minority readers. It was specifically about Lovecraft.
Okay.
But yeah, it was, and I was the moderator because I was the one that thought it up, and everybody was like, well, you thought it up, so you get to moderate.
You do it. Yep. Uh-huh. But we got together there talking, during that panel, and then talked afterwards for however long. Had to rush off and do other things, but the conversation, just the interesting ways and places that our discussions have gone, have just always made you stick in my mind. So when I was putting this together, I thought, let me see if he's available. I definitely want to see if he can talk with me about The Realm. And what's cool about it is you've actually gone ahead and finished the book, and we're going to have a real deep, fun conversation about it. So I'm really excited that you're here.
I love this. I love the book. I think you have created a cosmic horror on the lines of the old pulp writers, Howard, Lovecraft, that whole group, but you pushed past where they were and gone into some place completely new. You've added a psychological dimension and a physical dimension that a lot of their books miss.
Wow.
And well, because of the time, you have helped bring cosmic horror into the 21st century.
Wow. Goodness gracious. I may have to write that sentence down.
Well, okay. Yeah. You've helped bring cosmic horror into the 21st century.
That's fantastic.
And you've done it with a very, simple sounds bad, straightforward, clear, clean prose. You don't go into you know, vast, complicated sentences with, you know, with that you know you can't diagram. You do it with a straightforward prose that still carries the emotion of the characters.
Wow, thank you.
You do the show, not tell really well, but you will also understand that sometimes the reader may be lost, and so somebody just tells you,
Yeah.
this is what's going on. And like I said, I found things that were evocative of Dante.
Wow.
That these souls pass out of a world that doesn't notice them and into a forest, and that's how Dante finds the portal to hell, and the foyer to hell is a forest, and people are charging around, running in fear and in denial of where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And they're still for Dante, they're still chasing glory.
Mm-hmm.
And that some souls never actually make it into hell because all they're too busy running around.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that in and of itself is their punishment. But these are people who aren't necessarily being punished.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I found that to be, I found some of it to be an interesting meditation on death and on the afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was, these people are invisible to God.
Mm-hmm.
Because of reasons.
Right.
And I was like, well, that is what, like C.S. Lewis defined hell as, the absence of God and knowing God is absent.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I kept thinking, you know, they keep saying this isn't hell, but gosh, it seems like it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's a place of fear. It's a place of torment. It's a place of, your supernatural villain is an amazingly, he's not clownish.
Yes, that was important to me.
But he is clever. And at some level, he's relatable.
Yeah.
He's, this is not a banal evil, but this is certainly an understandable and recognizable consuming evil.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Augustine of Hippo described evil as the privation of the good, the absence of goodness.
Uh-huh.
And since at its root in the Bible, the creation is good, evil destroys, evil consumes, evil gnaws away. Evil has an unreality to it. And I see a lot of that kind of the hungry evil,
Mm-hmm.
the destroying evil, the worm that consumes from the inside. I see that
Mm-hmm.
in the ultimate villain.
Right.
I have a hard time assigning morality to a force of nature.
Nice. Nice. Yeah.
He is, I am the wind, I am the storm. He is kind of past a simple morality. He's just, so he's not bad, but he is evil.
Right. I like what you just said about, you said it is, he is. I mean, there's that shift throughout, I think,
Mm-hmm.
that he's relatable because you think he's a he, but then he goes into the more psychological aspect of the writing where it's an internal turmoil, and then
Mm-hmm.
you kind of think it's an it. You really don't know how to ascribe or what to ascribe to it. But before we go too far, I want everyone to understand this conversation had to happen with given the detail of this book and where this book even begins, like page 3, right? I mean, immediately kind of in this sort of space where you're dealing with death and dying. And I wanted to have this conversation with John. Please, before we go too much further, tell us about yourself so that everybody can understand why I'm so pumped about it. So go ahead.
My name is John Robison. I am a old Catholic priest. We are a vanishingly small religious movement with our roots in the Netherlands. Without going, we are very similar to Anglicans, except that we don't have an interface with Protestantism quite the same way Anglicans do. We are a result of sort of the monarchical papacy. We reject, stop it. Sorry, the cat. We reject papal supremacy and the dogma of the Immaculate Conception. You can believe in the Immaculate Conception if you want to, but it's not a requirement. It's not creedal. We ordain women, we ordain homosexuals, we perform gay marriages. But we are, like I said, we're vanishingly small. And I find that I pastor a very small parish here in Laurel. And one of my chief ministries is going around wearing my collar at science fiction conventions and talking to people.
Which is how
which is how we met.
Yep.
And I have had some amazing conversations with people about amazing topics. There's a hunger to talk. And that's what I use my very expensive seminary education to do.
This conversation makes sense. Now, anyone who was watching and wondering why, it makes sense because this novel is set in the afterlife. So the concept of the afterlife, I mean, I think I have on my back cover copy, is not the realm is not anything like what we've been taught. And now, I mean, and you would know better than anyone here, between the two of us at least, what we've been taught. You know, I mean, it's nothing like it, nothing at all.
No. Well, there are spots where it is similar to certain ideas that pass around. I mean, a lot of people is this purgatory? Well, I mean, kinda,
right.
I think that somebody very early on, somebody calls it limbo, and I'm like, well, no, limbo is neither bad nor good. It just is.
Right.
You're not being punished, but you're also not in heaven.
Right. You're not either let in nor cast out. You're
right.
Yeah.
And there is a certain level of being cast out for these people, and for what seems to be an arbitrary reason. But then you get into the reincarnation thing, and I'm like, well, I see where this might be headed, but I don't know, and that's why I like a good cliffhanger, but I also don't like a good cliffhanger. And you left me kind of hanging. I wanted another sentence or two, and I was like, I need to know.
That is on purpose, and that is psychological horror. Like the way.
Oh yeah, it is.
Oh.
Wait. What's going on now?
Right.
Wait. I mean, you threw 3 curveballs in the last chapter.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm like,
it's that fun, right? It's that fun though, because for me, reading can be, if I can figure out what's going on in the first 30, 40 pages, I don't know if I want to get through it. But now, the way that I like to craft my stories is that you kind of think but you may not.
I kind of expected some of it. I wasn't expecting all of it.
Right.
And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Okay, I got to reread this with this in mind to see what I missed. Because I know she told me that this was going to happen. I know she did.
Yep.
But this is not what I was expecting.
Mm-hmm.
And I enjoyed that. I am so tired of formulaic stories.
Yeah.
We were talking before we started, Anne Rice writes about vampires even when she's writing about Jesus. And Stephen King, an alcoholic with a typewriter in a small town in Maine.
We've seen this several times now.
Yes. And he even warns us in one of his books, don't read the last chapter. I mean, it's right there. You don't read it. Just assume everything ends in a happy way. And then boom, you're right back where you figured out where you were going to be 6 books into the series.
I used to be a fan of "And Then She Woke Up" or "Then He Woke Up." Actually, I think one of the first stories I wrote, but I was a child. That's the way it ended, and that can have some merit sometimes. But I think because it's not just beginning and ending, right? The journey getting towards is where all of that meat is.
Mm-hmm.
And how we got there, will determine whether or not I think that ending is okay. And in this, the topic of or the location and the topic of discussion here being the afterlife and what occurs, when Patrick gets there.
Yeah.
That was enough of an interest for me to follow along that pace and go with it and just see where it ended up. I mean, all these characters and the changes they went through as we got there they were based still in the focus of the book. You know what I mean? They weren't like sort of randomly thrown in. They were on purpose, and it was a purposeful ending, even if there's some cliffhangers.
Hold on just a sec.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yep, I hear you.
Okay. My earbuds just died.
Oh, no. No, it sounds just the same. It's good.
Hold on. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine.
I'm still getting used to the charge.
No problem.
I got them last week.
Mm-hmm.
You can hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay. But they were dying. The charge was dying.
Yeah. Can you hear me, or did you miss much of what I was saying?
Yeah, I can hear you. Just you sound like you're at the bottom of a well.
Oh, no.
Sure.
Okay, yeah. So what I was saying was that it's nothing kind of veered off path. The path may not have been straight, but everything that happened for a reason. And getting to that ending, there's some cliffhangers, sure, but there was all of it connects for why we're there.
At some level, I was like, the end of the book, I'm like, I wasn't expecting this, but why wasn't I expecting it? It makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This makes sense. And I liked that. It was a surprise, but then I felt like, why am I surprised? You told me it was what was going to happen, kinda. But I didn't want to go there.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really very, like I said, I was like, oh, wait a minute. So like I said, I went back and I read through and I'm like, this only makes sense in terms of the ending.
Mm-hmm. I kind of feel like sleight of hand with it. It was kind of, You know, I showed you, but you just didn't. I made you look at something else, and then you forgot, or you were surprised now, but I showed it to you. You made some interesting comments earlier when we were chatting alone before we started to record about the differences and the change in the way that we view death and pulling that into the story.
Yes. We've gone, after the First World War, there was a real attempt to de-domesticate death. Death was something that we made the realm of a professional set. The undertaker took over all of the aspects of death for us.
Mm-hmm.
We no longer had parlors in our homes. We had living rooms. And magazines like Better Homes and Gardens, Housekeeping Magazine, all of those stopped showing houses that were that had a parlor. Only houses that had living rooms.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that was because there was a real attempt at making death alien. And some of that was because of the horrors of trench warfare.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that was because the efficiency and professionalization craze. That's when they started making, that's when lawyers stopped having what were masters of, they became doctors, you know, a JD.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We everything professionalized.
Right.
And so we started elevating the university requirements. It used to be that you could get ordained as a priest with a bachelor's degree in religious studies, you know, Christians, and then it was, well, no, you really should get this other thing.
Mm-hmm.
They were originally called bachelors of divinity. They were a graduate degree, but they were still called a bachelor's. Now I've got I have an MA in theological studies, but most clergy have what are called MDivs, and it's professionalized.
Okay.
Professional graduate degree. And it is, but all of this has the same sort of thing. We made everything professionalized, compartmentalized. We certainly compartmentalized death. We've gone from ask not for whom the bell tolls to scheduled almost by appointment visitations at funeral homes.
Mm-hmm.
And people can die and you don't know, because there was until weeks after the fact, because there's a backlog of obituaries.
Oh, yes.
And they'll only put me in, you know, our local paper here in town. It's now owned by the Baltimore Sun, which is owned by the Chicago Tribune, and they're not willing to put all of the obituaries for our town in at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So we've gone from the thing you read to, you know, find out if you have to go to go to one of the 2 funeral homes in town, to you don't know that someone died until weeks later.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going on more and more and more. And then people were like, well, it was on the we put it on Facebook. We put it on, we've abstracted, we keep making death less and less and less a part of what we are.
Yes.
And people, my mother had a terminal illness. She was sick for years. And people still acted surprised when they found out she was dead. Because, well, how did this happen?
I mean,
were you not there?
it's almost like a canned response, don't you think?
Pardon me?
I said, don't you think it's like a canned response now? Just this sort of surprise towards death. That's what you're supposed to do or respond like if so you find out that someone passed on.
And we have such cliched ways of talking about it, and about the afterlife. You know, some of the worst things we can say. God needed another angel.
That bothers me so much. I can't. Or they're in a better place. That is one of the things I thought of, John, when I started writing this thing, because as soon as people read this, they'll see that better place. That's not where people end up in mine. So I don't know. I mean, why do you think we do that, though? Why do you think we come up with this, you know?
We inherited an intellectual tradition as Americans that was insanely optimistic. You know, this is the best of all possible worlds. I sometimes think that my sort of cynical worldview is born of the fact that I was introduced to Candide, Voltaire, in middle school. I saw a Bernstein's Candide, and that whole thing is a send up of the whole best of all possible worlds,
right?
You know, and but Dr. Pangloss is very much a part of the American worldview. You know, this is the best of all possible worlds, and anything that is unpleasant, I think at some level we've even professionalized unpleasantness and death and dying. And it's your job to terrify us, but we can then put it away. And what I think about books like yours is that no, existential dread is natural. Existential dread is the default setting.
Yes.
And loss. That's really where we are. Is that we don't want to be afraid unless we're paying for it.
Right.
We don't want. Death is a commodity.
Nice.
And even now, people are like, "Well, I don't want to have a will. I don't want to have life insurance because it seems so morbid."
Yes.
I'm like,
talk about it.
Yeah, but have you ever seen what happens when somebody dies intestate?
I'm sure they haven't. And I wonder, how can you not have? We've heard all these stories already. You know, I get the concept of, okay, I don't want to talk about it, but dealing or facing our own morbidity is, you know, in general, a scary thing, right? But, I lost your visual.
Hold on.
There we go. You know, and I'm sure by the time someone is 40, you know, they've seen at least or been to at least one funeral, I would assume. Right? I mean, so I don't know, maybe not though, but to not understand what happens.
Yeah,
you know?
Well, you see, when the number of people who, I used to work at a high school, and the number of the kids who were 17, 18 years old had never been to a funeral. Or had never been to a funeral home and never seen a dead body was shocking to me. I think I was 9 the first time I saw.
I was 6.
First time I saw.
Yeah, my grandmother had a lot of siblings, and she was the oldest of them. Now, mind you, my grandmother actually died last of all of them, but they were older people, you know, and we had one death per year. It felt like, no, at least one death a year, actually. But I want to say like 7 or 8 years, maybe even a little more. And that's at least one. Sometimes we had 2 and 3, you know, deaths. And like I said, almost all of them were older people. We did have a few younger ones in there, but I got very used to seeing dead bodies and going to the funeral. We had a funeral home that we used in the family a lot, and I got used to it. Didn't mean I liked it, right? Nobody likes that. I can't imagine that being a, you know, but I got used to it. And there's a business side of it that, you know, as I became an adult, I realized, well, somebody has to pay for the casket, pay for the service, pay for all these different things. There's got to be a plot, you know, all these things you have to consider, so that you can't just avoid the discussion. I mean,
yeah. Well, my great-grandmother, Esther, when she got to be about 95, and then she had a will, and she had all of her stuff planned, and she had all this and all that. That was fine. But for her birthday, when she turned 95, we bought her, the whole family chipped in and bought her a very nice tombstone, because that's what she wanted, and she wanted one that was better than her sister's.
I don't want to pick up my tombstone if I don't have to. I don't want that to be that gift they give me at 90 something. I don't want it. It's not the one. I don't want to be thinking about that right there.
But that's what she asked for.
Yeah,
and
of course.
It took a tremendous amount of pressure off of all of us, because she basically took over. I mean, she picked out her casket. She picked out everything. Everything was done. I remember one of the older ladies at a church I went to in Baltimore before I was ordained. One of the men of the parish was a funeral home, was a funeral director, and she was, every so often she would go up to him and say, "Now remember," and he's like, "Yes, I know. You know, they don't generally put shoes on a body,
right?"
Well, she wanted to make sure that she had her slippers on, because she never had bare feet in her whole life, and she wasn't going into the afterlife with bare feet.
That is something. When they show the, because I've never, wait a minute, no, I think I've been to one funeral where they had both sides of the casket open, and there were shoes on that one body, though. I've only seen this one time. But what part of the world is that, or the country? I think it's U.S., but what part of the country do they open both? Because on the East Coast, I've only been to mostly closed, like the closed lower half.
Yeah, the closed lower half is actually the norm.
Okay.
And if you notice, there's a little curtain at the waist.
Yeah, yeah. You know, you can't even look if you were so inclined. You couldn't look down there to see what was going on.
Well, yeah. Well, one of the reasons that they don't put shoes on them is because they're remarkably hard to get onto a corpse.
Really? I guess, yeah, wow. For practicality, no one's thinking about.
There's a practicality to it. It generally involves unpleasantness, a broken bone, something like that, and there's just certain things that nobody wants to have to deal with, so they don't.
No.
The whole casket being open, and they have specifically designed caskets so that nobody will. Now that nobody will look waist down.
Right.
When my grandfather died, we wanted him in his World War. He was in the Army Air Corps during the Second World War, and he had a bomber jacket from that period. And the funeral director said that it was probably the hardest garment he ever had to get onto a dead body, because there's no cooperation.
Yeah. I don't know how they do it. That's not a job I ever wanted to. I just don't want to.
No.
Like, I can't even imagine how they can do that.
Like I said, I've had the curtain lifted once or twice,
and
a lot of times what you don't see is that they flip the clothing up the back.
Oh, makes sense. Because who's going to check that? That's the thing. No one's checking that. No one's checking.
Ray Stevens, the country singer and comedian,
he
has a song about sitting up with the dead. And he talks about the fact that his Uncle Fred was so bent over that they had to chain him down so he wouldn't sit up in the casket. And about what happens when the chain breaks and he sits straight up when everybody's sitting up with him.
No.
Yeah, it's an hysterical song, but it's also very telling because, you know, he even says, that's kind of folks just don't want to know about.
No, exactly. Exactly.
Most people don't want to know what goes into it, or why, you know, there's I do not remember the exact channel name, but there's a YouTube channel about an undertaker, done by an undertaker. It talks about, you know, the secrets of the industry and some of her issues with the industry. But she also talks about how the rituals of death have changed.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be that they washed the body.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There is a tradition of when a priest dies, all of the priests in the area gather together and wash the body and dress them in vestments.
Oh, really?
And there's also a tradition where most people, when they are, you know, in the church, which is done less and less and less, at the funeral mass, their head is towards the altar. But if it's a priest, it's turned around so their feet are towards the altar, as if they're standing at the altar.
Was Pope John Paul like that?
Pardon me?
Was Pope John Paul like that? I kind of feel like I remember seeing that.
Yeah, they turned when they closed his casket, they turned it around.
Yeah.
So that
No, I remember when he was, because he had shoes on, didn't he? Or he was not even in. What I saw, he wasn't even in the casket yet. I don't think.
He was in a pine box, but they didn't put the lid on it.
They didn't put the lid on. Okay. And so I feel like he had shoes on, but his feet were facing the altar. I think. I never even knew. I didn't even think to question that.
It's one of those things, and it's one of those little rituals of death we've lost.
Yeah.
It used to be that people would come up and would sprinkle holy water over the casket or over the body,
Mm-hmm.
as a form of saying goodbye.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't even really give people a chance really to say goodbye the way that we used to.
Well, you have that whole traipsing in front of the casket before they close it, or make us all leave and then they close it. And then if you go to the service, you put flowers or something into the onto the casket in the grave.
But
that's
but yeah, it's sort of like and now with COVID, it's even worse.
Oh yeah. I attended my first funeral virtually. I watched it on Facebook Live. I mean, I can't. It's the only way they could do it, and so it's odd.
One of my cousin's husbands just passed, and we're not going to be able to do anything until December.
Oh my goodness.
Well, he's been interred, but we're not doing a memorial service until December.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because, well, one, his death was really unexpected.
Mm-hmm.
His was legitimately a surprise. And the other is because we can't get together.
Yeah.
And I can tell that would be something that would drive Steve nuts.
Yeah.
I mean, my first instinct was to drive over to
Right.
house.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized I couldn't because they had been at the hospital and had been exposed and were
Right.
and the number of people who are dying alone. I mean, the death scene in the book. Oh, I love the fact that he begins to find the process of dying annoying.
Well, it's because I kind of feel like, you know, there's a point, and I don't know, obviously, because I'm alive and talking with you, but you have this vision of if it's especially someone who's taking a while to get, they feel bad, they know it's coming, and it's just taking a long time to get to the end of it. The pain has even subsided now, but you know you're not getting out of it. You know, there's got to be a mental moment where you're just like, listen, you know.
You know, please, can this be? One of my great joys in life is that the last thing my mother heard was us laughing. But I imagine it is, you know, she was there at the end. She looked annoyed. Can this be over? God bless patience. And I could tell that she was just, oh, can this just be over? I'm tired, and I'm done. And you know, he was like, when will my, you know, but he's sort of like, you know, oh, this is torture, but also really annoying. And then bang.
Yeah, he was probably almost wishing for those moments because he couldn't console his son. I found that, you know, when I wrote that, it was before, at least that piece of it happened before one of the biggest deaths in my life. I had a lot of deaths that people were very important to me, but one of the closest people to me had not passed away yet. She has since passed away, my grandmother. But I'd written that scene first, like long before we knew anything. She was older. I mean, she was 97. I mean, you know, but she was in great health. So surprise, I kinda, you know what I mean? It wasn't expected at that moment. Let's put it that way. But when I wrote the scene, it was a little, and that's not the scene you've read. It's the one that didn't make it. But when I wrote it, it was sort of, you know, distant, you know, and not really connected to anything real. But then after she had passed away, the emotions of, she would have wanted to console us had she been hearing us. And I started thinking, good God, I hope she didn't hear us. You know what I mean? I hope she, you know, I don't want to give away too much, of course, of the part we're talking about, but the hearing, him wanting to lose his hearing here, that's important because you can't, and she couldn't raise, or rather he couldn't raise his hand to console. And I know that if my grandmother were in the same situation, I started like viewing it through her eyes, if you will. She couldn't console us, so to have to hear us suffer would have been utter torture. And so, you know, life experiences will form and shape something when you start going for it. Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I found was that it was very real. It was very real. It was visceral. I could feel him in that moment.
Good.
And that's one of the reasons why when I first picked it up, I couldn't put it down. Was because it's like I said, you took cosmic horror and you made it personal.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You took cosmic horror and you made it real. You know, it's not all capital letters, you know, it was real, it was visceral, it was in the moment. And I felt it.
Wow.
And then he's confused.
Yep.
I was gonna.
Poor thing. I felt for him. There were moments I'm just like, oh, this poor guy.
And the longer we go, I'm like, wait a minute. Wait, but there's and who is and where is and there were so many unanswered parts, and I'll be fine if not all the parts are answered. But it was confusion doesn't end with death. In fact, if anything, things became more complicated.
Oh, definitely, definitely.
Things he finds out.
Yeah.
Over the course of just the first chapters. And it's like, well, I really can't explain it to you because you got to experience it.
Right.
know when it happens. And I'm like, oh. But yeah, he, like I said, you explained just enough that I didn't know where we were going.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I thought I had a handle on the story, you threw me a curve.
Good. I mean, I'm sorry, but good.
Like I said, I'm tired of formula.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I want to just read something that's, you know, paint by numbers, and sometimes I want to read something that's not.
Mm-hmm.
And when I picked up your book, I knew I was going to enjoy it, but I didn't know what I was getting into. And you made me care about people who really were just sort of,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I knew something was up with a few of them before we ever started.
Right. Mm-hmm.
They're pleasant people.
Mm-hmm.
The only one of them who's the least bit pleasant is Patrick. And I kept waiting for him to do something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the torture, kind of the torture piece of it is that he is the pleasant one. And he's the one who, you know, we're looking at this world that he's experiencing, and like it's all happening to him or around him, and he's the one that you're like, well, but he's the one I could actually get behind, you know? And some of the other characters with their weird, I know there's a lot of stuff going on with them, but there should be, because I think that they're reflective of society now. I mean, none of those circumstances happened outside of the realm of what could occur in the world today. People act like that now. You know, I mean, this is what we might find anywhere. And I felt like it was important to, you know, reflect real people, because I write the lived experience. So that's why when you say that it felt real, it really means a lot to me, because I'm trying to make it be that. I'm trying to make it be where you can relate to someone else's response, because you've seen the response or you've had the response, you know. And so in each of the characters, there's a piece of like everyone's response in each of them. You know, poor Patrick has to immediately, he wakes up and he better get up and go, or else he's in trouble. And my response would be, what in the world, right? And I would, you know, but and he has that response. But the other characters are doing some, you know, truly questionable things. But at the same time, I know people who've done that, and I've done some of those things, you know, that some of the reactions that they've done, and I've had the same ones.
Well, and like I said, your villain is, or your big bad, or however you want to put it, is almost understandable. Almost. That's what's around at the edge, is that the sort of, you know, the confrontation with the big evil is, hi, how are you?
Yep. Because that is more, I don't know. I mean, I'm a horror author. I like vampires and werewolves and beasts, you know. Sometimes the beast doesn't look like a beast. It doesn't present itself like a beast. And you're not afraid of it on first pass. And you can relate to it. You wonder why you're relating to it and whether or not you're the beast. I mean, I've had those thoughts about myself. Like, I totally agree with that horrible thing that somebody just said. You know, and I'm like, why do I think that?
Well, and you know, sometimes evil is a slobbering monster, sometimes it's a dictator, and sometimes it's sitting on a barcalounger. You know, you captured that evil can be banal and evil can be cosmic, and sometimes it's both at the same time. I mean, this vast, and like I said, he's a force of nature, so you can't really say he's a bad thing or it's bad, but it's certainly a manifestation of the hungry evil.
Yes.
Shoots from the inside, the worm that burns. That was pretty obvious, almost from the get-go, almost from jump in that scene. You know, hi, nobody's that calm in that kind of situation unless there's something really wrong there.
Absolutely,
And
yeah.
Disconnected from the reality that the rest of us live in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And or maybe he's too connected.
One of the two. And the thing is, you can't put your finger on which it is, at least for a time. Hence that psychological horror piece that that's just what I live and breathe. I can't remove that.
It's scary. It was both scary and almost funny. Ha!
Yep.
And, he wasn't, he was tall, but he wasn't too tall.
Right. Yeah, it's that moment when you just can't tell what you think or why you think it.
And everybody feels, and he goes out of his way to make sure everybody's comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, he's good at this. He's just, this is the kind of wicked I could get into, because he is thoroughly evil. He's not a bad person in that kind of, the way we normally think of it.
Right.
Good and bad.
Right.
Not, and even when we define the good, we generally define the good in sort of simplistic ways. And there's nothing simplistic about any of those people in that room.
That's right.
The son is not exactly what you call a gem.
I have issues with him.
He's not exactly a gem. And Patrick is there, but we know what he's done, or supposedly done. In another life. But that doesn't seem to be him.
That's right. And that's that whole shifting planes thing that I'm trying to accomplish, in that you think you know what he's done, but what you think you know does not fit what we talked about already with this person. So then you start to wonder, is that what he did? Or is there something more to it?
And the character of the person who fills him in on the background is very compelling in and of herself. Particularly her relationship with the little bad.
Yes.
Terrified of him, also annoyed by him.
Right. Both things at the same time. And incapable of doing anything to affect him.
Right. But he can do all kinds of things to her. Although I did wonder at some point if there was a limitation on him, that there was something that he could not, there was a line he couldn't cross, otherwise he would have by then.
I'm just going to smile back at you now. I'm just going to smile back at you now.
Because he's not a real rule follower.
Right. Right.
But I found that whole exchange very interesting. But where they end up, I want to know, is everybody reincarnated? Because that does play into it. And I'm like, okay, so how do you, and I hope I haven't tipped too much, but there is, that's the aspect of it that I was not expecting.
I'm not going to answer you because I'll tip too much. Either way that I answer it will be too much, but.
No, I'm just asking the question because that's one of the questions that came to me. in the
That's
story.
mm-hmm.
Who is this? Who is this?
Mm-hmm.
Why are they? This seems a little too pat. There's something that nobody's telling Patrick, or there's something that none of them want to believe or knows. Although I did love the line, well, this isn't as complicated as you keep trying to make it. On the other hand, I was like, but it can't be that simple. There's something else.
Mm-hmm.
In part, I was like, I know her. She's not going to write something this simple. There's there's more wrinkles here. She's not going to write something this simple and this crude and not have something behind it.
Yep.
And I don't mean, I don't mean crude in a judgmental way.
No.
I mean crude. Crude is, overly simple. Broad strokes.
Mm-hmm. Right. No. No, you know me better than that.
Yeah. It's sort of like I have told several people the story about when you were like, when we on that panel proclaimed you Cthulhu because you were everything Lovecraft was afraid of. And, a woman of color who writes and is smart and articulate and is writing in his genre and isn't reliant on purple crows.
Mm-hmm. Precisely.
You told a great story. You have told a great story, but it left me wanting so much more.
And I'm excited by that. Because you realize it says The Realm Book 1. So
yeah, I understand that. But I have never read a novel that was, this story is finished, but it's still open.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Patrick's story isn't finished, but this novel is finished.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like, okay, the only way you're going to make this make sense is to read it. Everything made sense.
Good.
It's incoherent.
Nice. That is so awesome. I can't tell you how happy I am that you read that. And that you sat and talked with me today. I really appreciate it.
From a book in a long time, and you gave me chills, and I really am grateful for it.
Oh my goodness, that's so fantastic. Wow, thank you so much.
You're welcome. And when it comes out, and there will be a hard copy.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to buy the hard copy.
Thank you.
But I also want to be able to force it on my friends.
I love it. Thank you.
I want to force it on my way that you can't do with an ebook. I want to be able to go, you must read this. This is where I want my horror to go.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
I have not read a horror novel in so long because I got so freaking tired of it.
Mm-hmm.
It was just sort of, oh my God, another long, 15 pages of, sadomasochistic deviancy. Oh, wait, no, we got back into the plot. Or, like I said, Anne Rice and Lestat /Jesus /Memnoch the Devil. I swear the last one of her books I enjoyed was Memnoch the Devil.
That was actually a good one, though. I mean, it really was.
But that was the last one. I sort of enjoyed Pandora, but it was sort of like, if you're going to write about ancient Rome, have done something more than read Gibbon.
Yeah. I think I like Lestat, not is it Prince Lestat?
Could be.
It's like 13th or 9th or something. It was way down in the line of the books. I got further along enjoying it than it seems you did, because Memnoch the Devil's kind of early on.
Like I said, and when I was in seminary, and I was the one that had to climb on the funeral pyre and read her first Jesus book.
It's hilarious to me. You crack me up. You always have. I enjoy talking with you so much.
I enjoy talking to you. You flip on. Talking to you always flips on all the switches.
Oh my gosh. Thank you.
But yeah, I mean, some years ago, as a gift for my ordination, somebody gave me the complete works of Lovecraft, that big silver and blue.
Yeah.
And right before, like I said, I finished that earlier before we started recording. I was reading Dante.
Mm-hmm.
And reading the Inferno prepared me to read your book.
That is awesome to me, first of all. I just want to say that. That's what a reference. Oh my gosh.
Two references to the afterlife. Dante was trying to build an example of why the world is screwed up.
Yeah.
You were writing, well, the world's screwed up, and this is the consequences.
Right.
These are the consequences. And I liked it. There were parts where I was like, somebody would say something, and I was like, well, that's not quite. Well, okay, that's not quite what the. I also, by the way, like the fact that you had a physicality
Mm-hmm.
to the afterlife, that they had bodies.
Mm-hmm.
That they were walking around naked. It was also somewhat funny, but that they had bodies, that there's a physicality to it.
Yeah.
One of the things that you generally get into arguments about is that one of the early Christian theologians, Origen, he was so affected by parts of Greek philosophy that in the resurrection everyone would have spherical bodies because the sphere is a perfect form.
Huh.
Yeah. Yeah, read the Church Fathers. You don't get anything weirder than them. Yeah. Well, for Plato, the sphere was the perfect shape.
Mm-hmm.
The perfect. It had no angles to break. It was just perfect, and everything was the same distance from the center, and it just is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
It was the perfect shape. Aristotle said the same thing. The orb is the perfect shape. That's why creation is like nesting dolls inside of crystal orbs.
Got it. Okay.
So Origen, inheriting that tradition, says that in the resurrection, we won't be these sort of, symmetrical bipedal things. We'll be spheres, because that's what we were supposed to be all along. We were supposed to evolve spheres. Yeah. Of course, then one of his detractors was like, only Origen could turn us all into children's playthings, balls.
Yes.
Yeah, sort of like Diogenes presenting the chicken, behold Plato's man. It was sort of like, behold, Origen's resurrected person. But you do get people, and that's one of the things that gets joked about. And I was quite frankly thinking about spherical bodies when I was reading the book, because I was like, okay, yeah, there is a physicality to it, which is what the creeds say we'll have.
Uh-huh.
Just not where they say we're going to have it.
Right, right. Wow. See, and I love where your mind goes, because I'm like, I was not thinking about that, but wow. I just love where you went with that. Very, very cool. Thank you so very much for this chat. I really, really appreciate it.
This was so much fun.
We have to do it again sooner than we have. I mean, it's been too long in between. Hi, thank you for joining me today on the read of The Realm. The Realm is a horror sci-fi mashup that touches upon man's greatest fear, and it starts really fast, as you'll soon see. Today, we're going to read from the very beginning of the book, Chapter 1, the first few words of the story. So let's strap in and get ready for the ride. Chapter 1. It didn't happen the way they said it would. No angels came to greet him. No bright light funneled a path through the darkness. No relatives called to him from the beyond. He didn't feel warmth, acceptance, or love. He felt emptiness. He saw nothing in the moments before death, just an impenetrable darkness that crowded his vision like oil spreading in water, encroaching on the faces of his son and daughter-in-law, blackening them, obliterating them. He could hear them after his eyes dimmed, standing open and blind like black holes. His tear ducts dried up as his son cried over him. The sound of Doug's grief, the guttural moans roiling and meshing with his pleas, his barters with God to save his father, was more than Patrick could take. Trying but failing to lift his hand from his side and stroke his son's head, Patrick silently prayed that his hearing would dissipate as quickly as his sight had. Patrick could only imagine what Doug and Chris were seeing as his body broke down in front of him. Images of eyes ruined by broken capillaries filled with blood, his slacked mouth allowing a discolored tongue to peek through, tortured his mind. He struggled for every breath now, death's grip holding fast and firm. The thought of the kids seeing him fight for air, his face a twisted mass of pain and effort, upset him more than he thought it would. Death was not pretty. Doug moaned and Chris cried while Patrick's eyes grew drier and his skin grew paler. He thought it would never end, the display, the sick, cruel game Death was playing. That he should witness it, that he should have to hear the calmness his son usually displayed crumble and fall away, was torture, if ever there was the definition of the word. The devil, then. It was his work after all, he supposed. He was on his way to hell, and this was but a taste of what was to come. And then there was silence, utter silence. The sound of his son's anguish was gone, mercifully. The hum of the respirator, the clicking of the rosary beads the man in the next bed held, the squeak of rubber soles on the sanitized tile floor as the nurses and doctors hurried to his side, all sound had disappeared. He wondered what would be next to go. His memory? He quizzed himself just to see if it was already gone. What's my name? Patrick Richardson. How old am I? 59. Was is more like it, he corrected himself. After all, he was dead. Dead. Gone. Finished. Patrick stood in the pitch black silence, confused and unbelievably sad. He was dead. He would never see the baby that Chris was carrying, his first grandchild. He wouldn't ever watch another boxing match with his son and friends over a beer and pizza. He wouldn't get the chance to watch the waves break on the shore from a beach chair in the Caribbean. He wouldn't do anything anymore, not eat, drink, or fuck ever again, because he was dead. And death was dark, impenetrably so. How did this happen? He asked aloud, using a mouth he could no longer feel. He thought back to that morning when he was taking out the garbage. He could remember walking to the back of his house and getting the garbage can. The damned cat had gotten into it again. The little stray he left food and water for had knocked the top of the can off, torn through the garbage bag, and gotten to the trash inside. The little monster made a hell of a mess too, strewing soggy newspaper, chicken bones, and juice cartons all over the brick patio. Patrick remembered cursing out loud and casting his eyes around the backyard looking for the cat. He remembered turning back to the bowl he'd left out the night before and finding it full of food. "That's what you were supposed to eat, damn it," he'd said as he bent down to clean up the mess. On his way back into the house to get another garbage bag, a piece of the dream he had the night before came back to him. It hung in front of his eyes like a transparency over real life, framing everything with the hazy film of familiarity, all soft edges and anticipation. Déjà vu. As usual, after those dreams, the dark ones that made him wonder if he was really there, walking, talking, living within them. He wondered if he was the character whose face the audience never sees. The memory was faint, as it always was the morning after, but he knew what happened next. This time, the scene was identical to his dream. There was usually something askew, some crucial piece off-center, but this time, nothing was out of place. He knew he would turn away from the door instead of going inside to get the garbage bag. He knew he would squint from the sun when he did, and that he would place his hand above his eyes, shading them like a visor. He knew it just as well as he knew his name, for as easily as that knowledge came, it dragged heavy fear and worry in its wake. He obliged. It wasn't like he had a choice. Patrick heard a shriek coming from the next door, pulling him away from the dream world and into the land of the living with a jolt. It came from Mary Williams's house, an old lady who lived alone, despite her diminished vision and limited use of her legs. She got along fine. She cooked her own meals and cleaned her own house. She hardly left anything for the day nurse to do. Spunky old girl, Patrick remembered thinking. I hope I'm as with it as she is when I get to be that old. Something cold took up residence in his stomach, grafting itself to his insides and pulsating there. The shrieking voice didn't sound like Mary's, though. It sounded younger, more vibrant, less gravelly and weathered with age. It was probably the day nurse, Jennifer. With a sigh, Patrick detoured from his front door, crossing his lawn to mount Mary's first steps. The old girl might have kicked the bucket, he thought, as he approached the door. He felt genuinely saddened by the idea. The dream was dissipating, and Patrick was happy about that. Sure, he could still feel it playing along the edges of his consciousness, enticing him to come back and play. But it would lose this time and evermore. Patrick knocked on the door and called out to Jennifer, Mary's nurse, announcing himself. The door was ajar, and the force of his knuckles pushed it open. Patrick walked inside hesitantly, calling for Jennifer all the while, but there was no response. He called for Mary then, wondering if something had happened to the girl instead. Nothing. 2 steps into the foyer, and Patrick could see into the living room and dining room on the opposite side of the hallway. There was no one in sight. Patrick remembered thinking he should leave, thinking that he had been hearing things. But why didn't they answer? And why was the front door open? That Jennifer's car was in the driveway didn't register in his mind when it happened, but Patrick could remember it as clear as day as he recounted it. If he could do it all over again, he would do the same thing. He was sure of it. What happened was just meant to be. He went into the living room, intending to walk through the kitchen. I'll start that again. He went into the living room, intending to walk through to the kitchen and into the family room. If they weren't in there, he would go upstairs and check the bedrooms, then in the backyard. If he still couldn't find them, he would call the police. Mary rarely went out of the house, even with Jennifer's help. She enjoyed sitting in her backyard or in the window facing the road. Parks can't give me any more scenery than my backyard can, she always said. And I even get a glimpse of a handsome young man with his shirt off from time to time. Patrick snickered at the thought. At least he thinks he did. Him, a handsome young man? Right. Young wasn't a word that was being used to describe him anymore, at least not by the women he dated. Distinguished? Maybe. Vibrant? Sure. Young? No. But he kept himself in shape, enough that he wasn't ashamed to walk around with his shirt off. The sun on his back always felt good to him, ever since he was a kid working in the yard with his dad. And hell, if you looked hard enough, you could almost see his six-pack hiding beneath the layer of skin that stubbornly refused to flatten out. So if Mary liked to sneak a peek at him, she can go right ahead. Patrick almost made it through the living room when the shot rang out. The bullet punctured his chest, immobilizing his left arm and driving him to the floor before he could take his next step. He never saw the man who shot him, never saw what he had done to Mary and Jennifer, their bodies tied to dining room chairs that lined the wall of the kitchen, out of view from the picture window of the family room. All he knew was the hot, searing pain in his chest that seemed to burn his insides, and the blood that poured from the entry wound to wet his skin with its warmth. Patrick remembered the feeling of the bullet tearing through his body, seeming to seek out a place to rest, to destroy. He woke up in the hospital to Doug and Chris's faces, tear-streaked and raw. There was more wrong with him than he thought. He could see it in Doug's eyes. His son, always the cool and collected one, always the optimist. He could find a silver lining in every cloud, but not in this one. This time he saw a rain cloud for what it was, knew the storm was coming, and when it was over, nothing would be the better for it. And then, where the hell was Joanne anyway? Wasn't she supposed to have met him at the pearly gates when he died? Patrick thought bitterly. Doug and Patrick had lost Joanne 10 years before to breast cancer. Patrick liked to imagine that she would be there waiting for him when it was his turn. He thought she would come for him, would ease him away from life, his pain dissipating as he looked into her beautiful eyes. That's what they said would happen, those preachers he had listened to and believed over the years since Joanne died. The ones he clung to desperately, needing to believe they knew what they were talking about. So where was she? Where was his mother, his father? What about Jennifer and Mary? They were dead too, weren't they? That's what Doug and Chris were talking about when he came to. He remembered hearing his son, his level-headed boy, cursing God for letting his father walk into that house. But what about them? Surely they would come to greet the man who tried to help them, who died because he cared. But he was alone, in darkness. Anger coursed through him as he searched the pitch for something, someone. And then profound sadness overtook him as rapidly and completely as his anger had. His son would raise his child to remember his grandpa instead of actually knowing him. A prayer would be sent up for him on holidays and on his birthday for as long as Doug was alive. But after that, there wouldn't be anyone left to remember. His would be just another headstone at a cemetery overgrown with weeds, just an old picture in a dusty frame of a man his granddaughter and great-grandchildren would never know. Patrick had ceased to be. He felt lightheaded. No, he corrected himself. Lightheaded might be what he would have felt if he were still alive, still in the body that had walked the earth for 59 years. He longed to feel lightheaded. He wanted it so badly that he allowed himself to think it was what he really felt. But he realized with more poignancy than he would have liked, he didn't feel anything, nothing at all. I hope you enjoyed listening to Chapter 1 of The Realm as much as I enjoyed reading it. Gave me chills. I look forward to chatting with you about it.